Perek Beis, Mishnah Hey. Our Mishnah starts off by telling us, Elu Dvarim, these are the things, Sha'odom Yoitze Bohen Yedei Chavosoi B'Pesach, with which a person fulfills his obligation on Pesach. Meaning, the list that we're about to say are the grains which a person can use to bake his matzahs. We know that on the first night of Pesach, there's a mitzvah aseh deraisa to eat matzah. The pasuk tells us in Parshas Bo, Ba'erev teichlu matzahs, in the evening you should eat matzahs. So now the Mishnah is going to tell us what ingredients we can use to bake those matzahs. Mishnah tells us, B'chitim, you can use wheat. B'sa'orim, you can use barley. B'kusmin, or spelt. Or v'shifoin, with rye. Or v'shiboiles shual, or with oats. Dafka, those 5 grains can be used to make your matzahs and nothing else. Why only those 5? The pasuk tells us in Parshas Re'eh, Leisoichal olav chometz, you shall not eat chometz with it, meaning with the korban Pesach. Shivas yomim toichal olav matzahs. For 7 days you should eat matzahs. Says the Gemara Psachim, since we see that the mitzvah of matzahs is put right next to the mitzvah of chometz in the Torah, it tells us that you can only use ingredients which have the capability of becoming chometz to bake your matzahs. Only these 5 grains mentioned in the Mishnah have that capability to be able to rise and become chometz. You then use those ingredients to bake your matzahs and to arrest the rising process, and you make matzahs instead of making chometz. The Mishnah continues, V'yotzin b'demai, a person is yotzeh, the mitzvah of matzah, if he uses demai for his matzahs. What is demai? Demai is produce which we have a suffix whether or not maisers have been taken from it. Chazal saw that the Amaratzim, the ignorant people, although everybody still did take their truma because they were scared not to take truma because there's misa b'dei shamayim for somebody who eats truma when he's a zor, when he's a non-kohen, but certain Amaratzim did not anymore take maisers. Chazal therefore said that any time a person buys produce from an Amoretz, you cannot eat the produce until you've taken meiser from it. The word demai is a contraction of 2 words, do, mai. This, what is it? What is the status of this produce? Has it had meiser taken from it or not? It's a suffix, and therefore you have to take meisers from it before you eat it. This gzeira of Chazal, of demai, was never placed on aniyim. Poor people who buy demai are allowed to eat it even without taking maisers. For that we relied on the fact that the majority of our Amaratzim did take maisers. It was only a minority that didn't. When it comes to the mitzvah of matzah, since a person would theoretically be able to avail himself of this heter by taking all his possessions and saying all my possessions are hefka, by saying that he becomes an oni. Therefore, since it's possible for him to say that and to go through that process and to avail himself of this heter of eating demai, Chazal said you are yotzeh, the mitzvah of demai, if you use that for your matzahs. Tosfos in Psachim brings down the Shittas Hari, who wonders whether this heter is lechatchila, that even lechatchila you can use demai produce for your matzah, or it's only b'diavad. It's only after the event. If you've used demai for your matzahs, then we don't take the mitzvah away from you, and we say that you have been yotzeh. Okay. Mishnah continues, of a meiser rishon shenitlo trumosai. A person is allowed to eat matzahs if he's a Levi. He can take the meiser rishon, the first tithe that the farmer has to separate and give to a Levi. He can take that meiser rishon that he's been given, from which he's taken his trumas meiser, because a Levi needs to take truma from his meiser, which is 1/10 of the 10th which he has been given, and give that to a kohen. Once he's done that, he can use this meiser rishon that's had his trumas meiser taken from it and use that for his matzahs. Now, l'chayra, you would think, what's the chiddush here? Of course he can. Why shouldn't he be allowed to? He's a Levi. He's eating meiser rishon, which he's entitled to do. He's taken his trumas meiser from it. What's the problem? Says the Gemara Psachim, we're talking here about a case where he is a Levi. He's got his meiser rishon. He's taken his trumas meiser, but the truma gedola, the main truma from the whole produce, which the farmer is supposed to first take and give to a kohen, has not been taken. Now, under normal circumstances, that would make the produce that's now in the hand of the Levi tevel. And you can't eat tevel. You cannot eat produce from which the Truma Gedola has not been taken. But, says the Gemara, we're talking of a case where hikdimu b'shibolim, where the Levi took his Meiser Rishon from the produce before the produce was ever mechuyev to take Truma Gedola in the first place. Why? Because he took it before it had been threshed, when it was still in its ears ears as it was growing. At that time, there's no chiyuv yet to take Truma Gedola, and under those circumstances, he's allowed to eat this Meiser Rishon, which he's taken Truma Gedola, but has not yet had Truma Gedola taken from it. The Mishnah continues of a Masa Sheni for Hekdesh Sheniftu. A person is Yotze, the mitzvah of matzah, by using Meiser Sheni, the second tithe, after the farmer has taken his Truma Gedola, and after he's given the Meiser Rishon to the Levi, he then takes Meiser Sheni, a tenth of whatever is left, and he takes that to Yerushalayim and eats it there with his family. However, he does have the option, if he wants, to be paida, to redeem the hekdesh, the holiness that's within the Meiser Sheni onto money, and take the money to Yerushalayim and spend it on food there and eat it there, and the produce from which he has taken this redemption is now like chulin, he can now use it in the normal way. The same thing with hekdesh. If a person is makdish his food for bedek habayis for the purposes of, he's consecrated it for the Beis Hamikdash, he can redeem it, he can be paid of it onto money. The kedusha then is taken away from the produce and put onto the money. He can use this Meiser Sheni and he can use this hekdesh for matzahs. What is the chiddush of that? Surely that's obvious. The teretz is, when a farmer wants to be paid his Meiser Sheni, it's not enough for him just to take the value of the actual Meiser Sheni and put that onto coins. He has to add an extra fifth to it. The Mishnah is telling me that if he's paid his Meiser Sheni or his hekdesh without adding the extra fifth, although he still has a chiyuv to add that extra fifth, nevertheless, the pedia, the redemption, is good, and he is yotza, his mitzvah of matzah with such produce. Mishnah continues and tells us, V'ha kohanim are yotza the mitzvah of matzah, b'chala or b'truma, by using either chala, which is the truma taken from dough that we take and give to the kohen, or with truma itself, the kohen is allowed to use that for his mitzvah of matzah. Ava loy b'tevel. A person is not yotza the mitzvah of matzah with tevel. Now, of course, we cannot be talking about tevel deraisa. Tevel is produce from which trumas and maisas have not been taken. Such produce cannot be eaten, there's no question about it, and therefore, of course, one cannot be yotza the mitzvah of matzah with such produce. But the Gemara tells us the tevel we're talking about here is a tevel derabonon, not a tevel deraisa. Midaraisa, this is produce that does not need to have trumas and maisas taken from it. For example, we're talking about produce that was grown in an otzitz she'enoi nokov, in a flower pot which does not have holes, a non-perforated flower pot. We only midaraisa need to take trumas and maisas from produce which grows in the ground. If it's a flower pot which has had no sustenance whatsoever from the ground because it doesn't even have any holes in it, it has a solid bottom, such produce which grows in that otzitz she'enoi nokiv, midaraisa, does not need to have trumas and maisas taken from it, only midrabanon. Nevertheless, since there is this issa derabonon and it is tevel derabonon, you cannot be yotza the mitzvah of matzah with such produce. Mishnah continues and tells us, V'loi b'meiser rishon, sheloi nitra trumosai. The Levi is not yotza the mitzvah of matzah by using his meiser rishon from which he has not taken trumas and maisas. Again, that would seem to be a little bit obvious, and therefore the Gemara tells us we're talking about a case where he's taking Meiser Rishon from produce, which was mechuyev to have Truma Gedola taken from it, but has not yet had that Truma Gedola taken. The only way that Levi can use the Meiser Rishon is, first of all, he has to separate the Trumas Meiser, but he also has to separate the Truma Gedola. And until he does so, even if he separates his Trumas Meiser from his Meiser Rishon, he cannot use such produce. And says the Mishnah, you cannot use Meiser Sheni or Hekdesh that has not been redeemed. Avad, you can't use that for your mitzvah of matzah either. Mishnah continues, Chalois Toida, the chalos that come with a carbon taida, and you'll recall that we learnt in Perek Aleph Mishnah that there is a carbon taida, a thanksgiving carbon, which a person brings to the Beis HaMikdash at a time when he's thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for some deliverance from some potential danger that he was in. Every carbon taida comes with 40 loaves. 10 of those loaves are chametz and 30 of them are matzah. If he wants to use one of those matzahs to be yotze his mitzvah of matzah, or, says the Mishnah, or a kikei nozir, the wafers that a nozir brings. A nozir is somebody who's been makabel upon himself a neder of nazirus. He can't cut his hair, he can't be metamel mace, he can't make himself impure from a dead body, he cannot drink wine or any grape produce. Such a person, when it comes to the end of his nazirus and the term of his neder has finished, has to bring certain karbonos. Amongst the karbonos are wafers, rakikei nozir. Those wafers are matzah, and he wants to use those to be yotze his mitzvah of matzah. Says the Mishnah, it depends. Aso'on la'atzmai, if that carbon taida, those chalas of the carbon taida, or the rakikei nozir were made for himself, that he is a person who's mechuyev to bring a carbon taida, or he's a person who's liable to bring, he is a nozir, and he has to bring the karbonos of a nozir, then ein yotzim bohen. You cannot be yotze with those chalos and with those rakikim. Why not? Because at the time you made them, you didn't have in mind to make them for matzah, to be yotze your mitzvah of matzah on Seder night. You had them for the purposes of your carbon taida or your carbon nozir. It was not therefore made l'shem mitzvahs matzah. But, says the Mishnah, Oson limkoi bashuk. If you made them to sell in the shuk, if you made them to sell in the marketplace, you didn't have anyone particular in mind, then yotzim behen, you are yotze. Why? Because when a person makes these chalas, or he makes these rakikim to sell in the shuk, he thinks to himself, if I find somebody to sell them to, all well and good, I'll sell them to him. And if not, I'll use them for my own matzahs. Since there is a chiyuv for a person to make matzahs on Seder night, l'shem mitzvahs matzah, therefore, he's yotze in this case because he did have that in the back of his mind. V'ad kan, Mishnah Hey.